Hi everyone, this is Hal Luftig with my Broadway podcast network show, Broadway Biz, where every episode I will chat with my friends, some of the top theater professionals in the business, about the business of Broadway.
Come join the Broadway Biz. You'll be a Broadway whiz. You'll learn to raise cash to open your smash. You'll be all the rage from the pitch to the stage. In no time you'll know the business of show, the greatest job there is. So join our squad as we applaud Hal Luftig's Broadway Biz. Let's get busy with the Broadway Biz.
My guest today is Tony Award-winning director Kenny Leon. I was so moved by Kenny's direction of Children of a Lesser God, and I couldn't have been prouder to have him on my team for that revival. As a director, author, and founder of Kenny Leon's True Colors, Kenny brings incredible care and insight to all of his projects. I am so honored he's here with me today on this episode of Broadway Biz. We are so lucky today to have one of the most preeminent directors currently working on Broadway. I first became aware of our guest today when he was the head of the Alliance Theater down in Atlanta, which he, I think, single-handedly turned into a major player in the regional theater circuit. So let's give a big Broadway Biz welcome to Kenny Leon. Hey, Kenny, how are you?
Hey, Hal. It's good to be here. And, I hope you and your family are doing really well.
Well, we are, thank you. And yours?
Everybody is healthy and good. And I just had the grandkids over who live in Berlin. And so they were over here for like 3 months and now they've gone back. So, I enjoy the peace that I have now that they're gone, but I miss them. I miss them terribly. So it's great.
Kenny, I wanted to start our conversation talking about Raisin in the Sun. It was the first play you directed on Broadway. And you, again, as I said, you did it in 2004 and again in 2014. In all of my experience in theater, I have never seen, or I had never seen, a director do the same play 10 years apart. The way you mined the gold, if you will, from each production was just stunning to me, and it blew me away. And I wonder if you could talk about how that first opportunity to direct for Broadway came to you.
My first Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun was produced by the great David Binder. So David Binder produced that production. And the one in 2014 was produced by Scott Rudin. I feel that I am lucky and blessed to have had the opportunity to direct such high-profile productions of the same play, because actually I approach every play the same, whether it's a new play or a revival of a play. I approach the play as if it's a brand new play. So in 2004, when I cast Sean P. Diddy Combs as Walter Lee and Felicia Rashad as Mama, Audra McDonald, Sanaa Lathan, the late, great Bill Nunn, that was a production that I will love forever, because I had so many different styles. So I'm always trying to approach the play based on who we cast in the play. And at that time, Sean Puffy Combs had not even acted ever. And so it was my job as a director. I'm always trying to disguise the warts of my actors. So in the first couple of weeks of rehearsal, I'm trying to see where the weak spots are. So with that production, since Sean had not acted before, I kept him still. He was stationary a lot. I wanted him to go for honesty, and I didn't want him to think about where he had to move. And you had these women around him. All the women got nominated for Tony Awards that year, and Phylicia Rashad and Audra McDonald won that year. In fact, we had 10 Tony nominations that year, and the only category that was not nominated was the directing category. So Phylicia Rashad always jokes with me. She said, "I guess the play directed itself."
Right.
So,
I always love that. Yeah.
so with that production, I moved the women physically a lot, an awful lot around Walter Lee. And in 2014, with Denzel Washington playing that role, I had him moving a lot, and I had the women stationary. In that production, you had LaTanya Jackson, Aniki Noni Rose, and it was a great cast, very different. We were after the truth. And so I'm also thinking about what the audience is going to get from each production. So 2004 in our country was very different than 2014. 2014, the president of the United States was the first African-American. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama came to the play. And I'll always remember having a conversation with Barack, during the play. He would tap me on my knee and says, "Oh, wow, that music you got, that's Miles Davis. That's from his first album. Oh, wow, that tune there's from 1959. And I was so impressed at how in tune he was with the jazz I used in that production. In that production, I used Miles Davis. And the other production, I used the original music. So in 2014, it was important for me to create an intimate version of a big play. And so with the set design, we even had the set move toward the audience in the first few seconds of the play. The stage just moved into the lap of the audience. And I thought that was great. And also, as the audience walked in, before they got to that moment, when they walked into the theater, they heard the voice of Lorraine Hansberry and a Studs Terkel interview. And that was important to me because people had not recognized, the brilliance and the intelligence of Lorraine Hansberry. And I wanted the audience to feel that, to feel her voice, to feel her energy, to feel her intellect, to feel her opinionated nature. And in 2004, it was more, let's look through a keyhole to this family that lived in 1959. Both plays highlighted the discrepancies between the housing market, in our country. So we didn't change a word in the play, but audiences receive plays differently depending on what's happening in the world. So I always try to attack each play by what does it mean to the audience today, right now. And when I was directing the 2014 production, I never, for one moment, not one day, did I think about that previous production. I treated it like it was a brand new play just written in 2014.
Wow, that is fantastic. Because, as an audience member, it certainly felt like that. It felt like, the 2004 production was stunning. And as you said, it had Phylicia Rashad and Audra McDonald and Sean Combs, who, everybody agreed, wow, he's really a good he has stage presence. Right. And in 14, I remember you had Denzel, and people were saying, and this was what's fascinating to me, he's too old for the part. And, I'm not giving away secrets here, but the actress who is, playing the mother, need to replace, and Sophie Akanita, am I pronouncing that right?
Sophie was the wife.
And she was a revelation.
LaTanya Jackson replaced the great Diane Carroll, and who had to leave our production. But LaTanya was amazing. And I remember when Denzel and I decided to do the play, and, Scott Rudin encouraged us to work together. It was our second time working together. We had done Fences together on Broadway in 2010. So Denzel and I met in LA, and he said, after we finished eating breakfast, he said, "I want to take you somewhere." I said, "Okay." And we get in his car and we go to this house, a nice, beautiful home with a nice yard and nice flowers out front. And we knock on the door, And a woman comes to the door and she says, "Oh, he's expecting you." And we go inside, and there, standing there, is the 89-year-old Sidney Poitier, who played
Oh,
Walter
yes.
in 1959. And I was like, "Oh my God!" So on one side, I got Denzel Washington, and on the other side, I have Sidney Poitier. So for this country boy from Tallahassee, Florida, who never even could imagine being or working on Broadway, but to be just surrounded by two giants in the industry was just, I was just I was speechless, and I can take the 3 hours that we spent together. I can take that to my grave as one of the most wonderful moments of my life. And I had so much respect for him. And I said, "Mr. Poitier, we've been getting a little pushback when we just whispered that Denzel was going to take on this role, and some people say, well, I don't know, his age may be a factor." And I said, "What do you think about that?" And Mr. Poitier said, "Let me tell you something. I did that play in 1959, and it was one of the joys of my life. And Lorraine was an amazing writer. And I don't think there's anyone in our country right now that can do more justice to that role than Denzel Washington." And I said, "Wow." I said, "But some people say that he's 60 years old playing that role." And I thought that since the play is about the realization of dreams, I thought that if the actor was older, then it made the situation more desperate. So I said, "What do you think, Mr. Poitier?" They push back and say he's too old, and he looked me straight in the face. And I hope I can say this on the podcast, but he looked me straight in the face and he says, "Fuck him."
I
And
love it.
I tell
I
you
love
now,
it.
when he said that, we had his blessing. We had his blessing to not try to duplicate what they did in 1959, but to just, carry on the legacy, carry on the legacy of the great performance of Walter Lee, played by Sidney at one time, played by Ossie Davis before that, and played by so many African-American actors all across our country and throughout regional theater. So that was a really important production, but I'm so glad that Mr. Poitier blessed it. Whatever work we do, in special revivals, we have to thank the people who were there when the page was blank, when it was nothing. So when we reinterpret it in future generations, we stand on the shoulders of all those artists who were there when the page was blank. And so that's one of the joys of my life, to have had the opportunity to have directed two productions of A Raisin in the Sun for Broadway.
Wow. I got to say, Kenny, publicly, I still find myself in awe when I'm around you and listen to you about how sensitive you are and how forward thinking you are, that Walter Lee at 60 is going to feel more desperate than Walter Lee at 30, because I never thought of that before, that an older Walter Lee would have that desperation. I'm just so always amazed at your ability to look at things like that in a contemporary light, and bring in the original, like family, and learn from their experience. That's what makes you you, Kenny. That's what makes you you. And I'll love you to death forever for that. Kenny, I wanted us to take a step back in time and ask you, what were some of your goals and how you became the artistic director of the Alliance, and when that happened, because you're so goal driven. And I don't think anything you do, sir, is done by accident or on, fly by the seat of your pants. So I'm interested in how that was for you, at the Alliance, and what your goals were for that theater.
Well, as many people may or may not know, I did run the Alliance Theater in Atlanta for about 10 years, and at the time was one of the very few Black artistic directors running major artistic institutions. But that was not my goal growing up poor in Tallahassee, Florida. You know, my mother was 15 years old when I was born, and she was pregnant with my brother, and my sister was 2 years old, and she headed south from Tallahassee, Florida, down to St. Petersburg, Florida, and she left me with my grandmother. My grandmother had 13 children, and I always consider myself as the 14th. And so that time was beautiful. That was a beautiful time in my life, when just growing up with my grandmother on a small farm in Tallahassee, sitting on the porch, watching cars go by, taking a bath in a tin tub after you warmed the water on the stove and poured it into a tin tub in the middle of the living room. And so that's how I grew up. And then later on, I went to live with my mother and stepfather down in St. Petersburg, Florida, and ended up being the oldest of five. Together, my stepfather and mother probably made like $10,000 a year. And so, you know, I never knew I was poor. I didn't think of myself as poor, but certainly college was not even in the forecast. And I got involved with a program called Upward Bound, which was to assist poor income families, low income families, and guide us to college if we had college potential. And Angela Bassett, who grew up in my hometown, was also in this Upward Bound program. And so from ninth grade on, we were taking college classes on the weekends, and in the summertime, we had to stay on the college campus and take classes and play sports and act in plays. And they guided me toward college. And I knew I was the first class. I integrated my class racially in high school. And so I spent a lot of time with my white friends. And so when it got time to go to college, I knew I needed to go to a Black college. I just wanted to know more about my own culture. And so I couldn't go to Tallahassee because that's where grandma and my uncles and aunts lived. So I went to the next state up. I had never traveled anywhere. And I went to Georgia and Atlanta. And in Atlanta, in the Atlanta University Center, there was a Clark College. I was a student at Clark College. Across the street was Spelman College, was all female. And across the street from that was Morehouse College, where Dr. King went to college. And during that time, I met people like Samuel L. Jackson, who was an older professional working with college students. And then there was his wife, LaTanya, who was there. And then Spike Lee was studying there. And so we all were friends. Angela Bassett, Kenny Leon, Samuel Jackson, all of us, Spike Lee. And that's where I kind of got the bug, and I was a political science major, but a theater minor. Long story short, I went to law school for a minute and then left law school and came back to Atlanta. So 6 or 7 or 8 years later, I'm still there, and I get the opportunity to direct a play. And there was a play called The Wishing Place. And it was a really odd, crazy play with snow in the living room and leaves blowing through the bathroom. It was a crazy play, but I loved it because as an actor, I felt like I was always just that slice of the pie. But as a director, I felt like, I have to know what the pie is made of. How sweet are the potatoes? What kind of pan is it in? What are all of the ingredients? And I loved that. And I said to the artistic director, I want to do more of this. And he said, Kenny, I don't think you have the skill set to direct. We think that you could be the next Denzel Washington. You could be just an amazing actor, but we don't think. And at that time, I decided to leave that company. And in that same year, an artistic director by the name of Timothy Neer approached me because she had saw my work with the homeless population. She saw me act in several plays. She saw my work in the community. She said, we should apply to this grant for the National Endowment for the Art for this Director Fellow program. And I'm going to be working at the Alliance Theater across the street. And you can come in for this 1 year and be our resident director. And we could help diversify that big institution. I said, okay. So we filled out all the paperwork, and the panel decided that I would be one of the 6 fellows. But they said, we do not want you to go to the Alliance Theater. We do not want you to stay in Atlanta. You must leave Atlanta. So I had never been anywhere. So I looked at a map. I said, okay, I want this fellowship. I want to go to this place. It's called Baltimore, Maryland, Center Stage in Baltimore, Maryland. Why Baltimore? Because it's not New York. I was afraid of New York. It's like, that's the big city. And then Washington, D.C., that was very political. So I went to Baltimore, worked with Stan Voyevosky at Center Stage. And during that year there, I took a group of board people to New York to see a play, my first Broadway play in 1988. And that play was a play written by a young African-American writer by the name of August Wilson. And it was a production of Fences. And James Earl Jones and the great Mary Alice were performing in it. And sitting in that audience, I was like, I've never felt this before. For the first time, I feel that my mother's rituals and her myths and our storytelling is on a raised stage in front of the whole community. I was like, wow, I know what it smells like in the kitchen when your mother put a straight comb on the stove and put that steam on your sister's hair and straighten her hair. I know what it feels like to sit on the porch and eat a slice of watermelon. I know what it is like when Black men gather around the porch on Friday after returning from a job that they hate. I know what it's like when garbage men come home and say, you know, why does the white guy always drive the garbage truck and the black guys always do the lifting on the back? I remember those stories and I said, wow, that's what I really, really want to do now for the rest of my life. And I met August after that and he says, if you ever need me, you can always contact me and you always will have permission to do any of my plays. And a year after that, after that fellowship, I was offered 2 or 3 jobs in the country. And one of those was associate artistic director at the Alliance Theater, the theater that I was trying to get through for the fellowship. So a year later, I'm hired as their associate artistic director. And then 2 years after that, I was named as artistic director to run the entire institution of that $15 million institution. And then the first play I did as associate artistic director was Joe Turner's Come and Gone by a writer named August Wilson. The play had not even been published yet. And then when I took over as artistic director, I directed a play called Fences by August Wilson. And during all that time, August always would come to Atlanta doing tech and previews and note the show and work when we would spend a week together or so. And that's the way I ended up doing all 10 of his plays in Atlanta. So that's my short story about the Alliance Theater. I ran that for 10 years. And I found out in my life that every 7, 8, 9 years, you should try to reinvent yourself. You should try to do something different, or you should energize the job that you're in. So I found that to be true. You know, starting at the Academy Theater, I was there for 8, 9 years. Then at the Alliance Theater, ran that theater for 10 years. And then I thought I was going to come to Broadway and just do plays in 2004. But, you know, somebody put on my heart and spirit to start a theater company. So I started a smaller company called True Colors Theater Company, a theater committed to the storytelling of African-American writers. And now I'm no longer artistic director, but it has a wonderful artistic director there by the name of Jamil Jude. And we're in our 18th year. So I'm so proud of that company. I'm so proud of starting it. I'm so proud of my work with the Alliance Theater all those years. And I'm proud of the 12, 13, or 14 Broadway plays that I've done, including, you know, Children of a Lesser God with You, which I couldn't be more proud of, and proud of that cast. And I remember we took the chance of casting Lauren Ritloff, who was a stay-at-home mom, deaf woman of color. We cast her, and now she's the first superhero in a Marvel picture, you know, as a deaf woman. And so I take a lot of pride in sort of all of the work that I've done collectively with all of these great artists in our wonderful country.
Yeah, as you should, Kenny, as you should, and congratulations on True Colors. It's you never cease to amaze me, even as I'm listening to what you're saying now, some of which I did not know, and you really do. You're like a chameleon, if you'll excuse the expression, but because you do reinvent yourself. It's not just words. I've actually seen it. You start in one place and you end up morphing into something else, which is all about genius and creativity. It was fascinating. And to that end, I want to back up for a second and talk about Children of a Lesser God, if we may. I want to know, if I may ask, what were your thoughts when you first read that play? When it was a first approach to you and you had to read it, what did you think about the play at that moment? Do you remember?
Yeah, when I first read it, I remember the film version of the play, and I felt like, okay, this is a pretty good story about a deaf woman being in love with her hearing teacher, and I was like, I love love stories, so I'm going to commit to that. And I feel great that the Broadway world has approached me to direct a play that's not necessarily African American specific. And so when I agreed to do it, I was thinking of doing an all Caucasian production of this love story between this deaf woman and a hearing man. I spent time with an ASL instructor because I knew that it was going to be at least 2 or 3 people in the play that were deaf. And so I wanted to take these classes, and a friend recommended two instructors. And one of those people was Lauren Ritloff. And I flipped a coin to decide which one to approach. And it came up heads on Lauren Ritloff, and I approached her, and she was my ASL teacher for a year, every Tuesday, waiting for us to get a Broadway home or decided how we're going to move the play forward. I was just taking class from her, in public places. We would go to public places, and one day we would study our colors, and the next day we would study transportation. And, it was just a great experience. And then when you asked me, like, okay, we have to do a reading for this play, who's going to play the roles? And then it occurred to me, like, well, why can't Lauren play this role? Oh, she's not Caucasian. Oh, right. But okay, but who says the woman can't be a woman of color? Okay, so then if that is a woman of color, we knew at the time that Joshua Jackson was going to play the hearing teacher. So okay, so she could be in love. Now it's an interracial couple, interracial and challenged with hearing. Okay, then who's a mother? So it was the foundation of then casting a fully diverse production in every way, age, race, abilities. And as a director, I'm always listening to the universe about how to cast or how to make moves or how to build a production. And I have to say, going into this, I thought I was going to have an all-white production, and then we had the most diverse production ever, and it was the most beautiful production ever.
Yeah, you're right, Kenny. It's like when the ethos, are talking to you. The reason we had that reading was because Joshua had to decide whether he wanted to commit to this part. I mean, it's a great part, but whoever played that part really had to learn ASL. He couldn't fake it. It would have been too insulting to the deaf community.
Right.
So he wanted to hear it read. And I just need to tell this to the listeners because I hope I don't embarrass you too much. But at that reading, yes, we said, let's use Lauren. She knows, the role. She is, a deaf, a person who signs. So why don't we just use her? And we said, sure, it's just a reading. It's really for Joshua. How it turned out was really for him. It turned out she was amazing. And for our listeners, it also turned out that from the age of 13, she had made a choice not to use her voice. She took a strong stand on, I have a language, and it's called sign language. And if you want to speak to me, you learn that. I don't want to have to be forced to lip read or use my voice to communicate. And so she hadn't used it since she was 13. And we got to the part in the reading where the Sarah, the character, has to yell back at James, her husband, her then husband, because she's so frustrated. He said, I won't speak to you unless you speak my language, my language. And she made this guttural sound that just slayed everybody, including her mother, who had not heard her voice in all those years. But I looked over at you, and I hope there's not the embarrassing part, and I've never seen this since. You, like everybody else, was so visibly moved and shaken, and I've never seen that before. And when I looked over and I saw you feeling that, I thought, this play is going to happen. This play is going to happen, because it touched you. And I think when a good play is done, it has to touch the director in that way. Well, deeper than cerebrally. It has to really get inside of him.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a special moment, because the day before, it was a 2-day workshop, and the day before, Lauren said to me through an interpreter, she says, well, I haven't used my voice. Should I rehearse it today? And I said, no, don't do that. Let's just save it to the performance, to, when there's an audience here. And you have to understand that Lauren has no idea what the human voice sounds like. So no matter what we may feel about how it sounds, it's still, we're judging it. We're making the judgment. And she said, I'm not giving you that. So she can't tell what it sounds like. And so on that day and we're all human. So when she let that out, I really understood the play in a deeper way then, because it taught me as a director and a human being, sometimes we're trying to force people to live the way we want them to live, and how awful and cruel that is, because the sound that Lauren released was beautiful. It was raw. It was ugly, but it was an ugly act from this hearing person making this person who was in love with him, this non-hearing person, try to communicate with him on his terms. And I'll never forget the last line of our play, which is, I'll help you if you'll help me. And I've taken that with me since that production. It's like, whether we're talking politics or we're talking about the differences in racial issues or gender issues, I think we should say to ourselves, you know what? I got to do my part. I'll go halfway and you meet me halfway, and then there should be some growth there. So actually, when you caught me teary-eyed and shaking, it was really a human moment where I realized how ugly we can be as human beings to each other.
Right. It's true. It's true. And every time I saw the performance, it just melted me. And it was prophetic, Kenny, because it's sort of like where we are now about, in the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, people want to be listened to. They haven't been listened to. And it's a very important lesson. Like, how do we listen to people who don't exactly speak what, our language or what we're saying? Continually think, as we move further down, the road, especially in the theater community, I'm always reminded of the message of that play: listen, stop talking and listen. And that's what James kind of learns, at the end of the play. So, it is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And I thank you for that.
Thank you.
But now we're gonna hop skip over to the other side of the country and talk about Hollywood. You directed the TV version, the live version of Hairspray, and also The Wiz, both stunning productions. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference was for you as a director, as an artist, working in the two different mediums?
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up on the day after the Emmy nominations, which were yesterday, and I received my first Emmy nomination for producing and directing American Son for Netflix.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so proud of that. And also, except for the loss of life, my mother lost. Well, I lost two aunts and an uncle through COVID, and except for not being in the room with people like you or with my fellow artists, those are two major things now, and I hate that. But everything else about this pandemic and about this attention to issues of race or racism in our country, I think it's been great. It's been a wonderful moment for our country and our world to slow down, to stop, to be still, so that we can listen to each other and listen to ourselves, so that we may move to a more a beautiful place. I'm in a group called Black Theater United, and one of the things that we realize is that police reform and prison reform and community reform and reform in our industry in terms of race is all connected. So the tenets of Black Theater United is focused on the integration of all of that and how every area affects another. When I jump to the television side, I describe myself as a storyteller. So I say some things are meant to be on the stage, some things are meant to be used in a musical way to express yourself through song. Some things are meant to be on behind the camera. So I'm always trying to figure out, where is the audience? When I'm in the theater, I know where the audience is. The audience is in the dark, breathing the same air as the performers. And it's a sacred place, which we will probably be the last one to come back, because the pandemic has taught us one thing, that we are one of the most sacred places. We are a gathering place to share our stories, to listen to each other. So everything about the pandemic is anti-theater. But I think when we do come back in our fullness, which I think we will, I think people will have a greater appreciation for that sacred, holy space we call theater, that gathering place to share and learn about each other. And so I think I love being in the theater. When I'm translating a piece of art to the camera, I'm saying, okay, these people are in their living rooms now. They're in their kitchen. So I have to tailor it to that. When we did the Wiz Live and Hairspray Live, the reason I didn't have an audience for the Wiz Live, because people kept saying, why don't you have an audience? I was like, this is not theater. This is television. The audience is the people at home. So I want to tailor this for that audience. So I shot it in a way that would engage people in their homes. When we did Hairspray Live, I had a little audience because it lends itself to an audience when the scenes were outside. But when you had love scenes or when people were in their bedrooms, you couldn't have an audience, because I'm always thinking about the viewer, the experience that you're going to have if you're the audience. So where is the audience? Is the audience in a big theater? Is the audience in our homes? Or is the audience in a theater with the actors? So I love that I can do all of that. Like when we did American Son, we did the play first. And then when I made it a movie, I shot it totally different. Just like you said, those Raisin in the Sun was different from each other. American Son as a film was very different. My subtitle to myself for the film of American Son was A Mother's Worst Nightmare. So I shot the movie from Kerry Washington's point of view. What did it feel like for her to be in that room with three men, all with guns, at 4 a.m, and you don't know where your son is? And the reason that is called American Son, and the reason I never show, you never did see their son's face in this movie. And that was important to me, because I think once we see someone's kid, once we see the face, we're like, oh, that's a black kid. That's an Asian kid. That's a white kid. And I wanted the people watching this film to say, what if their son was my son? What if all the kids in America, what if they belong to all of us? Let's look at these young people through the lives of mothers and fathers. So I wanted everyone to feel that this kid is their son, and that way you take the other kind of controversy out of it. So I love television and film, but theater is the one I could never give up.
Well, that's great, Kenny, because we're not letting you go. You know, I'm gonna horse tie you, and you're gonna stay in Broadway. You know, it's funny that you said, you know, an audience and their reaction in different, you know, mediums. I was also very taken. You know, you did this wonderful production of Much Ado last summer in the park. And by the way, congratulations on your Obie win. But one of the things that I was so taken by in that production was your inclusion of the audience. It almost felt like, you know, on stage, the actors we were there like a third character. You know, they talked to us, they looked at us, you know, and at one point I remember one of the actors asked the audience member a question. And it was fascinating to me. Do you, when you were doing that production, was that on your mind of how you can get this vast, because the Delacorte's a big theater, how you can bring everybody in, like scoop them up and you know, hug them towards the stage?
I'm always thinking, I'm thinking about where the audience is. There's 1,800 people at the Delacorte. And I said, what if my father, who's no longer with me, what if, and he was born in Tallahassee, Florida, a country guy who never got on a plane until like 2010 when he came to New York to see my production of The Mountaintop with Samuel L. Jackson and Angela Bassett. And I would tell the cast, I want Shakespeare to be clear for my daddy, Leroy. So he would be like, what are they saying? And I found that Shakespeare that's done in our country, a lot of the times we try to imitate the Brits, and we don't search for clarity and honesty and intentionality. And so, and knowing that the play was a comedy full of music, I never let myself forget that. It's a comedy, but it has subtle messages about the way we're living our lives. And then setting the play in the future, I had to keep asking myself, what if Shakespeare was alive today? What if Shakespeare was alive in 2020? What would he say? How would he move this? And so I was on them, like, I didn't want the play. I knew going in, I said, the play can't be over, you know, originally I said 2 hours, but I ended up doing it in like a little over 2 hours. But that was the most important thing, is like, let's say what you got to say and move on. Because a lot of comedy is in the rhythm and tempo. You know, sometimes we may not understand everything that is said, but in terms of the delivery, the tempo, the rhythm has a lot to do with meaning as well. So it was important to me to keep the fun in it. It was important to me to have it move at such a pace so that when I wanted to slow it down, the audience would be with me and slow down with me. So I was it was a real delicate balance, but I'm really proud of that production, and I would love to see that play have a future life. And I think to see African Americans play those roles and to do Shakespeare really well, and to see a plus size woman play Beatrice, I thought it said a lot about identity and perception of self. And I still get many letters about that production from all kinds of people all across the world.
Well, Kenny, you know, full disclosure to our listeners, I want to be one of those producers who moved that production. And maybe a positive, one of the things that was in a roadblock was Danielle's availability and theater availability. You know, maybe one of the positive things that can come from all of this is that theaters will be available. I'm not sure about Danielle's schedule, but maybe even that will open up a little bit as production starts ramping up.
Yeah, I think you're right, because if we had gone to Broadway, we would be closed now. So,
that's true. And you'd be talking to a maniac.
And Danielle's schedule, this is Danielle Brooks from Orange is the New Black. It'll open up. In fact, that I'm starting a film in September prep. In October, I'm shooting this film for Lifetime, and they're going to announce it soon. But it's the Mahalia Jackson story.
Oh, wow.
With her music and her life. And I've cast Danielle Brooks in that lead role. So we're going to do that, and we'll be done with that by the end of the year. So all of next year, we're available.
As soon as we open up, yeah.
Yeah, who has any idea about that, man? I just know that whenever we do come back to Broadway Theater, I think there will be a greater appreciation and love for gathering in the theater and sharing diverse stories.
I agree. It's one of the things that I've noticed that people are truly missing, that experience, that community that happens, that sharing of energy, if you will, between the actors and the audience. And even, some of the stuff that happens backstage that jumps over the footlights, the stage crew and the costume department, and the wig, all those people working so hard and dedicated to making that performance that an audience member is seeing, unique and special, and they don't ever take it for granted. And I think we miss that. We miss that in theater. Kenny, I just wanted to touch upon one last thing before we have to unfortunately say goodbye. And that is in your Tony acceptance speech that you said you were looking forward to the day when every child in America could have a piece of theater in their daily educational lives. I am such a supporter of that concept. For the past 10, 15 years, I work with TDF to make sure that, on Wednesday matinees, whatever show I'm working on, a number of tickets gets donated to the school system so they can take, kids in the inner school system that would never have the opportunity to go see a Broadway play into, the theater. And I'm just wondering, clearly why that's important to you. And do you see a way forward for people like myself, producers, management, to be able to make that dream a reality?
Hal, I do believe that theater and art and music should be important parts of every young person's life in grade school, in junior high, and high school. I think it's so important to develop our creative minds, to nurture our storytelling. I think it helps with us understanding each other, understanding the lens that everybody's looking at life through. I think when I talk to young people, I hear young people talk about challenges with being transgender. I hear the voices of young gay people. I hear the voices of the people of color. And I think that theater and storytelling, that would help those lives and those minds stay healthy. I think that the Broadway producers assist in a lot of that, not only in Broadway, when they're on Broadway, but also assisting when the shows tour around the country, and to make sure that our young people get to see them. A big part of what we need to do is just make sure all of our young people feel good about their life and their stories that they have to share and contribute to the world.
Beautifully said. And especially now, listen and encourage and support, playwrights, directors, artists, actors, of color, to support the notion that they get to tell their story.
Hal, it's important to me that every American life have equal access and equal worth. And we need to take the judgment away from it. And I think we need to be truthful about our past, our history. And some of us, we need to study a little more in terms of knowing our history and how it got from, 1619 to 2020. And we have to admit that white racism in this country is foundational. That the country began on the foundation of like, okay, we need to sell this cotton. We need free labor. We need that. So that's the truth. Let's admit what the truth is. And only from admitting to what the truth is can we create a much more beautiful life for our grandkids. And that's what I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of making a much more beautiful country where every life has equal importance and equal beauty, and it's all there. The beauty is there. We just have to realize it and help these butterflies fly.
Yeah, I'm with you, Kenny. And anything I can do, I give you my word, my pledge, anything I can do to help support that notion or help you support that notion, I'm in. This has been amazing, as I hoped it would be, because you are one of the most amazing people I know. But before we go, I ask every one of my guests these three, I call them rapid fire questions, and I'm most interested now to hear your answers to these. And here's the first one. Kenny Leon, what is your favorite musical?
The Wiz.
As a director, as an artist, in any role that you've been in the theater, what was the wackiest moment, the weirdest, funniest, bizarre thing you ever experienced in the theater? Do you have one? Can you recall?
I remember one time I was doing a production of Fences, and when you have diverse groups of people together, they respond different. So for Fences, it was a large group of Black audience members that were at this one performance, and they were, they talk back. They talk back to the audience. They are engaged, and then your traditional audience, sometimes they don't understand that. So I remember these two women just got up arguing in the theater because the Black woman was enjoying herself too much. And they had this big argument. She said, "Don't you laugh out loud like that. You can't do that. I pay good money to sit here and you can't laugh like that." Lady, I paid my money too. And let me tell you one thing. And this big argument, the usher was stuck in the middle and had to solve it all. But it was just the challenges of trying to put different cultures in the theater together. And some people feel like they are the theater police. So that was funny. One of the more beautiful things that happened to me, I remember when we did the Raisin in the Sun in 2004, and Sean Combs, who was, he was a rap artist and he had never acted before. So he felt a lot of pressure to play every performance. So he played every performance until this one Sunday, he was really sick. He was just very, very sick. And he had to end up, in the bathroom every few minutes, and he was just sick. And we begged him, "Don't your understudy, Billy Eugene Jones, is your understudy. He's ready to go on. Don't worry." "No, I'm going on." And he did the play in serious pain, and he did the first act, and he was just in pain. And then it came off at intermission, and the doctors just wouldn't let him go on. And so you had to drag him off stage. And then Billy Eugene Jones went out and did the second act. And that experience of seeing this actor who's new to acting, who gave everything he had, and then an actor who was his understudy, who was a really trained actor, to get the opportunity to go on as well, that audience that night had a special, unique performance. And I'll never forget that performance of the two Walter Lees.
The audiences love that. We in theater, producers, directors, they, are horrified when that happens. But the audience, it never ceases to amaze me. They love it. When the set malfunctions, when an actor has to be replaced, they just go crazy for it. It's, and I think it's because they know it's live.
As a director, I was happy that it happened, that we changed actors in the middle of the show. as opposed to at the top of the show having to announce that the star is not going on. So it was like, the perfect in, both worlds.
Well, Kenny Leon, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. You've just inspired me, and I'm sure all of our listeners, on ways to move forward and ways to be considerate of other cultures and other people, and to look at things with a more sensitive eye, and to just look at storytelling in various ways. So I cannot thank you enough. I'm sending tons of love to you and your family, and I can't wait until we open up and we can actually do that production together of Much Ado.
Well, thank you so much. And just to end in a more positive note about the Black Lives Matter, you have to say Black Lives Matter. Of course, we know all lives matter, but the question before us now is, does Black lives matter? And if we're in a neighborhood of houses of different colors and the Black house is on fire, and we have to put out that fire, that Black house, we have to put that fire out, and that's been burning for 400 years. And once we put that fire out, we will learn a lot about all the other houses. So Black lives definitely matter.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. A perfect way to end the program. Kenny, thank you. I'm sending you a big virtual hug, and I can't wait today we can have one of our world famous breakfasts together.
I would love that.
Until then, stay well, stay healthy, and all those good things.
You too.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Broadway Biz. If you have any questions about today's episode or the business of Broadway in general, let me know on Instagram at Broadway Biz Podcast or via email at broadwaybiz@halluftig.com. Be sure to follow me at Broadway Biz Podcast for updates on everything Broadway Biz, the business of Broadway. Broadway Biz is part of the Broadway Podcast Network. Huge thanks to Dory Berenstein, Alan Seals, and Brittany Bigelow. This has been produced by Dylan Marie Parent and Kevin Connor, and edited by Derek Gunther. Our fabulous theme music is by Nell Benjamin and Lawrence O'Keefe. To learn more about Broadway Biz, visit bpn.fm/BroadwayBiz.